Guys, today I'm going to be doing a read through of an article on outofthiscentury.wordpress.com. This is run by Ben Miller. Most of these articles are written by Ben Miller. To understand more about this blog, we go to the About section. This blog is a chronicle of the past. Its aim is to bring to light the forgotten customs, traditions, individuals, and events that have shaped us as a people and a culture, or were simply remarkable in their own right, including fascinating, surprising, and shocking bits of arcana, which offer us a more vivid picture of the way that things were, and help us imagine how it might have felt to live in those times. It is history for history's own sake. Quote, history fades into fable. Fact becomes clouded with doubt and controversy. The inscription molders from the tablet. The statue falls from the pedestal. Columns, arches, pyramids, what are they but heaps of sand, and their epitaphs but characters written in the dust? End quote. Washington Irving. Quote, history is who we are and why we are the way we are. End quote. David McCullough. Scrolling down, we do see listed under writers more than just Ben Miller. We see also Carl Massaro, David Black Maestro, and Bronwyn. Going back to the article, checking under the title, under the main image. Yes, this is written by Ben Miller, sole contributor. The title of the article reads, The Greatest African American and Afro-American Martial Arts in History. This was originally posted on March 25th, 2014 at 4:34 p.m. Specifically listed under the following categories: bizarre and unusual, customs and traditions, Edwardian era, Middle Ages, military, Renaissance. Underneath the listing of those categories are 3 separate images collaged together for the main photo. Starting with the photo in the upper left, we see a white gentleman dressed in red, fencing against a black gentleman dressed in yellow. The photo below that photo, we see a black general atop a horse. And to the right of both those images, what appears to be a cropped close-up of a painting of a black man wearing a red jacket and what appears to be either a white wig or perhaps that's his natural hair, dusted with white powder, grasping a dagger close to his chest. Here is the article. When asked to recall a great martial artist of African descent born in the Americas, the average person is likely to mention a 20th century boxer, such as Joe Louis, or a more recent exponent of the Asian martial arts, such as Jim Kelly. Or, those of the younger generation might name the modern mixed martial arts competitor Anderson Silva, regarded by some as the greatest pound-for-pound fighter of all time. What many do not know is that in centuries past, some of the greatest practitioners of European martial arts were of African descent. Although Africans brought a number of their own indigenous techniques with them to Europe and the Americas, parentheses, as can be read about here, linked in red, and parentheses. They also sometimes trained in, adopted, and excelled at European swordsmanship, also known as classical and historical fencing, bolded in red. During the 18th and 19th centuries, it was even possible, parentheses, albeit difficult, end parentheses, for a person of African descent to achieve renown to such a point that they would be revered, and even sought for instruction, by whites. And the historical record shows that such was the case for multiple individuals. This is not to in any way minimize the oppression and ordeals that African Americans and African Europeans endured in the past. Rather, it is a testament to the extraordinary skill, ability, dedication, and perseverance of these individuals, which allowed them to triumph, at least as much as was possible, over the prejudices of their time and ascend to the highest ranks of martial achievement. An early instance of one such person can be found as early as 1733, when the following advertisement appeared in a Southern colonial newspaper, informing the public about a runaway slave or indentured servant. Quote, "Runaway from Mr. Alex Vanderdussen's plantation at Goose Creek, a Negro man named Thomas Butler, the famous pushing and dancing master," unquote. South Carolina Gazette, parentheses, Whitmarsh, end parentheses, May 19th to May 26th, 1733. I continue reading. In 18th century terminology, to, quote, push, end quote, was to launch an attack with the small sword, a fact which confirms that Thomas Butler was a fencing master, and one who had achieved some degree of fame, at least on a local scale. Butler was apparently so esteemed that in July of 1734, his former master was impelled to post the following additional notice. Quote, "Whereas Thomas Butler, fencing master, has been run away these 2 years since, and has been entertained by several gentlemen about Ferry who pretend not to know that he had a master. This is therefore desired that they would not do the like in the future. ... End quote. South Carolina Gazette, July 20th, 1734. These passages are all the more remarkable when one considers that they are the earliest known reference to a fencing master in the American South, the next being Edward Blackwell, who in 1734 posthumously published his treatise on the art of fencing. Although not much else is known about Thomas Butler, the above passages prove that as early as the 1730s, it was not impossible to achieve fame and esteem as a black martial artist, parentheses, and instructor, end parentheses, in white society. This article will profile 3 of the greatest such individuals: the Chevalier de St. Georges, Jean-Louis Michel, and Basile Croquier. Section: Historical background. As far back as the age of antiquity, there is evidence of martial artists of African descent testing their abilities in Europe. In ancient Rome, numerous African gladiators, mainly from Ethiopia, fought in the arenas made famous at Pompeii and the Colosseum. Most were, of course, brought to Rome as slaves. However, some gladiators were able to win their freedom due to their celebrated fighting ability, and even continued to fight in the arenas. Although a period image of African gladiators wielding swords could not be found for this article, on the right is a mosaic depicting an Ethiopian retiarius, linked here, or net and trident wielding gladiator, currently housed at the Musée Grenet, Aix-en-Provence, France. I'm going to take a detour here to look more closely at the mosaic. Mosaics are little pieces of stone, glass, and sometimes marble and other stones put together to form an image. In this mosaic, we see the right half has been eaten away at by time and its corroding forces. What is left is a black man. This man has his chest bare, only covered by a white gladiator skirt, possibly a tarouge, holding a trident in his right hand. Continuing on. Likewise, below is a photograph of two ancient Roman terracotta statues, probably from the 2nd or 1st century BC, depicting two African pugilists appearing to wield the cestus, a fighting glove sometimes used in pancration. Made of leather strips, cesti were sometimes filled with iron plates or fitted with blades or spikes, and could be devastating weapons. Here we see the image inserted. As described above, the two terracotta statues, each an African male with their arms in poses similar to boxing. Continuing on. As early as the late Middle Ages, people of African descent began appearing in European treatises on swordsmanship and the martial arts, such as the book of Hans Talhofer, parentheses, 1467, end parentheses, plates of which are featured below. Here, again inserted, similarly to the pictures above, we see multiple plates, starting with the first. In this first plate we see, which, by the way, below the second plate, we see the caption that reads above, plates from the work of Hans Talhofer, parentheses, thanks to Michael Kydester for locating these images, end parentheses. Before I describe them, I do want to let you know that I sourced them from the Wichtenauer site. Specifically, under their section on Hans Talhofer, I found these images correlated to images from the personal manuscript, which in parentheses after it is the year 1459. Here, in this first plate, we see featured in the background a fighting ring or barrier, as it can be referred to in the text. On the left is a white man in armor who's carrying a halberd over his head. Both hands support the halberd so that the staff line of the halberd appears to be pointing towards the, I'm going to say, mid to upper left. On the right-hand side, we see a black man in armor who is also carrying a halberd. However, this halberd is down behind him. He is carrying it with his hands on the lower left-hand side of his body, with the head of the halberd behind the back of his left foot. The description for this plate on Wichtenauer reads, the combative stance in front of the blow. The way that I'm reading this and the way the two characters oppose each other in this plate makes me believe that the black man is the one who is defending against the combative blow, as the white man is preparing the poleaxe over his head. The black man has the poleaxe behind him. Just because the poleaxe head is behind the black man, though, that does not mean that he has let go of the pole, as he still has his hands wrapped around the pole to prepare to block any strike that the white man is about to deliver. Moving on to the second plate. Again, also sourced from Wichtenauer, from the same manuscript. This one reads, "Catch the weapon." Again, on the left we have a white man in armor, and on the right we have a black man in armor. Based off of the description, and based off of the position the two characters are in, we see the white man has practically caught the weapon, where the thought behind it is he has the poleaxe initially in two hands, and then as the swing from the black man came in, he dropped his left hand to come around and under the black man's hands and encircle it as to be able to grab the black man's polearm. The black man's polearm is stuck behind the white man's back, as well as the white man's poleaxe, effectively trapping him. Please again note that this is my interpretation of the image as well as the caption that I found for the image on Wichtenauer. I continue reading. About 75 years later, combatants of African descent were also illustrated in the martial arts treatise of Paulus Hector Mayer, parentheses, 1542, end parentheses. And below that, we see two plates. The first one says, with their caption, above, a sickle fencer, clearly of African descent, pictured in Paulus Hector Mayer's Die Art Athletica, published in Augsburg, Germany, circa 1542. Source, infiniteMachine.tumblr.com. In order to find out the caption for these images, I went to the section on Wichtenauer for Paulus Mayer's treatise. I only found one copy for the treatise, and for the sickle and rapier sections, they had two white men instead of one white man and one black man. However, I was able to find the caption I needed. For the first plate, similar to above, we see on the left a white man. However, he's wearing clothing and not armor. And on the right, we see a black man wearing similar garb. They are demonstrating a cut with a sickle, which is called, according to Wichtenauer, a cut against a way of pulling by the opponent. The description reads as follows. In this fight, when you come closer to the opponent, you will stretch your right arm, and with the right hand hold the sickle opposite him, but hold the left hand on the left hip. And then, after you have followed with the left foot, you will hit the head of the opponent with the sickle. But if he comes at you in the same manner, while you are standing with the right foot in front, and if you hold the sickle against the opponent with the right hand, and in the same manner, hold the left hip with the left hand, you will displace his attempt to your right side. If from there you connect the sickle with his right arm, you will quickly pull him towards you. I will pause reading here because going back to the image we see on screen, that is in effect what is happening here. The white man is leaning forward towards the black man, holding the sickle as to pierce the tip of the sickle into the black man's head. However, the black man has taken his sickle and displaced the hand holding the sickle of the white man. And he's holding the sickle as such to catch the arm of the white man within that U shape of the circle of the sickle. Going back to finish the section in Wichtenauer, I read, "But if he wants to pull you towards him in the same way, if then with the left hand you grab his right, and to your right side displace the attempt of the opponent, hit his head immediately on the left side, and from there pull back. But if the opponent likewise pulls back again, you will threaten him sharply by following him, and hitting the right hand of the opponent with the sickle." Moving on to the second plate. Underneath the second plate, we see the caption, "Above, a fencer of African descent, wielding an early rapier, parentheses, or, quote, side sword, end quote, end parentheses. Pictured in Paulus Hector Mayer's De Arte Athletica, published in Augsburg, Germany, circa 1542. Source." Here is linked to a German museum. When I clicked on the link, I wasn't able to find the image right away. However, again, I did go to Wichtenauer to find a similar or the same image. And I actually found the same image, again, from Mayer's treatise under the rapier section. Since Ben's article here discusses that it was an earlier rapier and it could also be called a, quote, side sword, end quote, I will take his word on that. Similar to the above plate, we see on the left a white man wearing clothing, and on the right a black man also wearing similar garb. Again, this plate is found in Wichtenauer. And the section for this plate on Wichtenauer reads, "The winding thrust with a concealed point against an abdomen." Note that the word abdomen is spelled A-B-N-E-M-E-N. It happens like this with this technique at the closing. Step in with your left leg and thrust with an extended arm behind your head forward to his face. If he thrusts towards you like this from above, and you stand with your right foot opposite him, then drive up with your rapier and take it away from your right side to his left with your long edge. If he has parried you like this, then wind through low with a luftstich, in parentheses, it reads in English, in quotes, air thrust, end quotes, end parentheses, to his face or chest. If he thrusts towards you like this, take it away with your long edge to your right side. I'm going to pause it here because this is where I think we see the two characters mimic the text most closely. On the left, the white man has his rapier cocked with his right hand, but point seeming to face the top half of the head of the black man. However, the black man on the right has taken his rapier in his right hand and driving it high, also known as driving the point of the rapier high while keeping the guard of the rapier at about eye level or just above eye level, but canted forward ever so slightly, has blocked and taken the point of the rapier of the white man and driven it over to the side. However, this could set the white man up for a counterattack, as I read again from Wichtenauer. If he thrusts towards you like this, take it away with your long edge to your right side. Then immediately follow outward with your left and strike or thrust to his left forward set leg. If he persists and follows after you, then thrust to his face or chest from above, and with that step back away from him. I continue reading the article. Later, in 1657, a highly detailed account of Africans practicing European swordsmanship was sent down by Richard Ligon. Quote, some of, in parentheses, the African servants, end parentheses, who have been bred up amongst the Portugals, have some extraordinary qualities, which the others have not, as singing and fencing. I have seen some of these Portugal negres at Colonel James Drax's play at rapier and dagger very skillfully, with their stucados, parentheses says staccatos, their imbrocados, and their passes, and at single rapier too, after the manner of Chiranza, in parentheses reads Carranza, with such comeliness, as if the skill had been wanting, the motions would have pleased you, but they were skilful too, which I perceived by their binding with their points, and nimble and subtle avoidings with their bodies, and the advantages the strongest man had in the close, which the other avoided by the nimbleness and skilfulness of his motion. For in this science I had been so well versed in my youth as I was now able to be a competent judge. Upon their first appearance upon the stage, they marched towards one another with a slow, majestic pace, and a bold, commanding look, as if they meant both to conquer, and coming nearer together, they shake hands and embrace one another with a cheerful look. But their retreat is much quicker than their advance, and being at first distance, change their countenance, and put themselves into their postures, and so after a pass or two, retire, and then to it again. And when they have done their play, they embrace, shake hands, and putting on their smoother countenances, give their respect to their master, and so go off. End quote. Richard Ligon, A True and Exact History of the Island of Barbados, 1657. Ligon's account provides evidence that despite their low social status, people of African descent living in the American colonies were sometimes allowed, even encouraged, to train with various weapons, including the rapier and dagger, and became skilled at multiple styles, including Italian rapier fencing, as well as the profound system of Spanish swordsmanship, parentheses, la verdadera destreza, end parentheses, founded by Geronimo de Carranza. Here, inserted, is another photo of a black man wearing an older style orange cap with what appears to be a gold coin at the front, carrying a sword on his lower left hip. Below the image, we see the caption, Portrait of a Moor by Jan Mostert, early 16th century. I continue reading. Colonists of African descent also undoubtedly learned from less savory channels, such as piracy. An estimated 1/3 of pirates during this period were black, and in such company, knowledge of swordsmanship was paramount. The following passage, culled from Captain Johnson's General History of the Pirates, parentheses 1728, end parentheses, gives rise to the possibility that black members had access to sword instruction. Quote, Pirate Captain Misson took upon him the command of 100 Negroes, who were well disciplined. For every morning they had been used to perform their exercise, which was taught them by a French sergeant, one of their company, who belonged to the ship Victor. End quote. During the early 1700s, a number of swordsmen of African descent also fought as gladiators in the British colonies. Although these highly ritualized combats, linked here, took place in locations as remote as Jamaica, Barbados, and rural Ireland, during the 17th century, the most popular setting for such fights was undoubtedly the infamous, quote, Bear Garden, end quote, in Southwark, London. In 1762, a Frenchman named Josephine de Rochefort visited the Bear Garden and observed, quote, We went to the Beargarden, where combats are fought by all sorts of animals, and sometimes men, as we once saw. Commonly, when any fencing masters are desirous of showing their courage and great skill, they issue mutual challenges, and before they engage parade the town with drums and trumpets sounding, to inform the public there is a challenge between two brave masters of the science of defense, and that the battle will be fought on such a day. End quote. What followed these processions was violent and often gruesome. On the appointed day, to the sound of trumpets and beating drums, the two combatants would ascend the stage, stripped to their chests, and, on a signal from the drum, draw their weapons and commence fighting. The combat would continue until one man conceded or was unable to continue. In de Rochefort's account, the combatants continue fighting while enduring horrific wounds, including severed ears, sliced off scalps, and half-severed wrists. Bouts occurred with different types of weapons, including longsword, backsword, cudgel, foil, single rapier, rapier and dagger, sword and buckler, sword and gauntlet, falchion, flail, pike, halberd, and quarterstaff. Although such fights were not intended to end in death, the wounds received were often serious enough to incur it. At least a small number of these gladiators are recorded as being of African descent. One of the earliest known instances was in May of 1701, when, quote, George Nerval Turner, a black, master of the small sword, end quote, who had, quote, fought several prizes, end quote, and, quote, William Thompson, a black, ... master of the science of defense, end quote, appeared at the Bear Garden in London, challenging several other gladiators to a contest with sharp weapons. It was announced that, quote, all four do intend to fight a double prize, James Harris and William Page against the two blacks, ... by reason each man doth intend to exercise the 6 usual weapons, end quote. Another such example was, quote, Thomas Phillips, the black from Jamaica, master of the noble science of defense, end quote, who fought in at least several public contests between 1724 and 1725. Many of these public challenges were racially charged, parentheses, a common feature of the period, end parentheses, as can be seen in the following specimen, published on September 14th, 1724, and fought between Phillips and a white Englishman named Robert Carter. Quote, "At the usual place at Hockley in the Hole, tomorrow, being the 15th of September, will be performed a trial of skill by the following masters. Whereas I, Robert Carter, master of the noble science of defense, have often been affronted by one Thomas Phillips, a black, in saying he is as good a master as myself. Therefore, to convince him of his opinion, I am resolved to see what color his blood is of, and whether there be any difference between a white and a black, desiring him to exert his utmost skill, I resolving to do the same. I, Thomas Phillips, lately arrived from Jamaica, master of the said science, will not fail to meet Mr. Carter as above. And as for seeing what color my blood is of, I value him not, nor any other master, but believe I shall find means to fetch as much blood from him as he shall do from me, desiring no favor from him, and not questioning in the least, but to give entire satisfaction. N.B. On Tuesday last, a soldier got on the stage and was saucy. Therefore, 'tis expected he will be there tomorrow, and he may depend upon being well licked. The doors will be opened at 2, and the masters mount at 5 precisely, by reason of the decrease of the days." End quote. During the early 18th century, an English fencing treatise entitled, quote, "The Art of Defense," end quote, printed and sold by one, quote, John King, end quote, was published, containing several plates in which black fencers demonstrated various fencing techniques. Similar to above, we see 2 plates inserted here. The top one has the caption saying, "Above, illustration of a black fencer making a, quote, disarm in cart," end quote. Source, truefork.org. Like the caption said, on the left we see a black fencer wearing normal clothes, and on the right we see a white fencer wearing similar garb. The two appear to have small swords in their hands. And the black fencer appears to have not only his own small sword in his right hand, but to have trapped and caught with his left hand the small sword of his white opponent. Moving on to the second plate. The caption for this reads, "Above, illustration of a black fencer making a, quote, pass in tierce with the knuckles up," unquote, while checking the adversary's blade with his unarmed hand. Source, truefork.org. On the left, we see a black fencer wearing regular clothes. On the right, we see a white fencer wearing similar garb. And true to the caption, we see the white fencer has made a lunge at the black fencer, but the black fencer has parried that small sword with his left hand, and with his right hand has extended and stabbed through the upper chest of the white fencer. Continuing on, although such illustrations were the exception rather than the rule, they provide further evidence that blacks could be regarded as potentially serious fencers. In fact, one such fencer, Julius Sobiese, 1754 to 1798, a freed Afro-Caribbean slave, was hired to be the personal fencing instructor to Catherine Hyde, the Duchess of Queensberry, and was sent to train under Domenico Angelo, one of the most renowned European fencing masters. Also, at this time, emerged the greatest fencers of all time, who just happened to be of African descent. Section: The Chevalier de St. Georges. Below the header, we see another image inset here with the caption that says, Portrait of St. Georges. Source, Wikipedia. And the image shows a black man wearing what appears to be a white powdered wig, clutching what appears to be, based off the hilt, a kind of small sword. I continue reading. Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier de St. Georges, parentheses, 1745 to 1799, end parentheses, was born in Guadeloupe, in the Caribbean, the son of Georges Boulogne de St. Georges, a wealthy planter, and an African slave named Nanon. Although his father also had many white children, he took a special liking to Joseph, and in 1753 took his son, age 7, to France, where he began his education in a variety of arts, including fencing. According to the son of the fencing master La Boissière, quote, at 15 his, St. George's, progress was so rapid that he was already beating the best swordsmen, and at 17 he developed the greatest speed imaginable. End quote. He was still a student when he publicly defeated Alexander Picard, a renowned fencing master in Rouen, who had foolishly referred to St. George's as, quote, Boissière's mulatto, end quote. Henry Angelo, son of the famous Domenico, parentheses, and a highly reputed fencing master in his own right, end parentheses, often went to fence with St. George's while in Paris, and wrote about him in his memoirs. Quote, no man ever united so much suppleness with so much strength. He excelled in all the bodily exercises in which he engaged. ... He was a skillful horseman and remarkable shot. He rarely missed his aim when his pistol was once before the mark. ... But the art in which he surpassed all his contemporaries and predecessors was fencing. No professor or amateur ever showed so much accuracy and quickness. His attacks were a perpetual series of hits. His parry was so close that it was in vain to attempt to touch him. In short, he was all nerve. End quote. Below that, we see another image inset here with the caption, Fencing Assault Between St. George's and Deyon. Source, Wikipedia. In the image, we see a bunch of onlookers, mostly appearing to be white men, appearing to observe a duel, perhaps, or just a match between St. George's, who's on the left, and a white woman on the right. Continuing reading. Angelo also related some details about St. George's in the following anecdote regarding an episode wherein the two crossed blades. Quote, it may not be unworthy of remark that from his being much taller, and consequently possessing a greater length of lunge, I found that I could not depend upon my attacks unless I closed with him. The consequence was, upon my adopting that measure, the hit I gave him was so palpable that it threw open his waistcoat, which so enraged him that, in his fury, I received a blow from the pommel of his foil on my chin, the mark of which I still retain. It may be remarked of that celebrated man that, although he might be considered as a lion with a foil in his hand, The contest over, he was as docile as a lamb, for soon after the above engagement, when seated to rest himself, he said to me, quote, Mon cher ami, donnez-moi votre main, nous tirons tous les jours ensemble, end quote. End overall quote. Although there are too many anecdotes about St. George's prowess to recount here, one of the best comes from Alfred Hutton, and occurred in Dunkirk. St. George's was attending a party with a large number of ladies when a captain of the hussars began boasting of his own skill in fencing, oblivious to the identity of St. George's. The latter calmly asked the captain, quote, That is interesting, but did you ever happen to meet with the celebrated St. George's? End quote. The captain responded, quote, St. George's? Oh yes, I have fenced with him many a time, but he is no good. I can touch him just when I please. End quote. Whereupon St. George's challenged the captain to a bout at foils on the spot. Hutton's account continues. Quote, The captain, seeing that he is opposed to a man much older than himself, is inclined to treat him with contempt, when the veteran fencer calmly turns to the ladies and asks them to name the particular buttons on the gentleman's coat which they would like him to touch. They select half a dozen or so. The pair engage. The famous swordsman plays with his man for a few minutes for the benefit of his audience, and then proceeds to hit each of the named buttons in rapid succession, and finishes by sending the foil of his vainglorious enemy flying out of his hand, to the great delight of the ladies, and the discomfited captain is so enraged that he wants to make the affair a serious one, a duel, there and then. His victorious opponent corrects him with, quote, Young gentleman, such an encounter could have but one ending. Be advised, reserve your forces for the service of your country. Go, and you may at last tell your friends with truth that you have crossed foils with me. My name is St. George's. End quote. St. George's also became a respected music composer and became the instructor of Queen Marie Antoinette. In her diary, the Queen referred to St. George's as her, quote, favorite American, end quote. Here is another image inset into the article. There is some faint text in the background, which appears to be the inside of someone's home, with stairs in the background. Close to the stairs is a white man cowering before a white woman who is putting her fists up towards him. In the foreground, we see a black man striking with his left hand towards a white man. And the caption for this image reads, Sketch entitled, quote, St. George's and the Dragon, end quote, depicting St. George's boxing. Source, theprintshopwindow.wordpress.com. I continue reading. Not one to forget his African roots, St. George's was also an ardent and active abolitionist, stating in public, quote, the slave trade is a barbarous practice and must be eliminated, end quote. St. George's activism drew the ire from many in the slave trade, who attempted to silence him with violence, attempts which were thwarted by the Chevalier's considerable martial prowess. Quote, Early in July 1789, walking home from Greenwich, a man armed with a pistol demanded his purse. The Chevalier disarmed the man, ... But when 4 more rogues hidden, until then, attacked him, he put them all out of commission. M. de St. George's received only some contusions which did not keep him from going on that night to play music in the company of friends, end quote. The journal General de France, on February 23, 1790, also reported that, quote, The Chevalier was peacefully walking to Greenwich one night where he was going to make music in a house where he was awaited when he was suddenly attacked by 4 men armed with pistols. Nevertheless, he managed to drive them off with the help of his stick." End quote. We see another image set here, which is grayscale, and has in the foreground, black man on the left, appears to be St. George's, and a white man on the right. And the background appears to be a bridge under which they're meeting, and some onlookers in the background. The caption for this image reads, "St. George's meets a rival fencing master who has challenged him to a duel," under L'Arche Marion. Source: Wikimedia Commons. St. George's also commanded, as a colonel, the first all-black military regiment in Europe, a unit that came to be known as St. George's Legion. Among its officers was a lieutenant colonel named Thomas Alexander Dumas. The father of the famous novelist, Dumas would go on to become a general in revolutionary France, and the highest-ranking person of color of all time in a continental European army. Below that, we see another inset image with a black man in a uniform riding a black horse, with the caption, "General Thomas Alexander Dumas, painted by Olivier Pichet." Source linked here. Continuing on, St. George's was evidently looked upon by the French with great veneration, for a number of drawings and paintings of fencing salles show his famous portrait displayed upon the wall with considerable prominence. Below that, again, another image inset here, this time of the inside of a salle, with 2 white fencers in the foreground and many people in the background. And in this case, St. George's, located in the form of a portrait on the upper right-hand corner of the painting. The caption for the image reads, "Angelo's famous salle d'armes displaying St. George's portrait." Continuing on, although St. George's passed away in 1799, his name and image is venerated among classical and historical fencers throughout the world. Section: Jean-Louis Michel. Quote, "The founder of the modern French school of swordsmanship, and the greatest swordsman of his century, was a mulatto of San Domingo, that famous Jean-Louis, who in one terrible succession of duels, occupying only 40 minutes, killed or disabled 13 master fencers of that Italian army pressed into service by Napoleon for his peninsular campaign." End quote. Lafcadio Hearn, 1886. Below that, we see an image inset of a black man wearing a top hat and a suit. And underneath that, the caption reads, "Source: C. Metiers de Montpellier.wordpress.com /biographies Michel Jean-Louis," which is just the backwards name of John Louis Michel. John Louis was born in Haiti, parentheses, then Saint Domingue, end parentheses, in 1785, the son of a French fencing master. Later, he served as a soldier in Napoleon's army. His most famous exploit as a duelist was a regimental, quote, mass, unquote, duel that took place near Madrid, Spain, in 1814. French soldiers from the 32nd Regiment and Italian soldiers from the 1st Regiment quarreled. Within 40 minutes, Jean-Louis killed or disabled 13 Italian fencing masters in succession. Quote, The regiments were assembled in a hollow square on a plain outside Madrid. At its center was a natural elevation forming a platform where, two at a time, 30 champions would duel for the honor of 10,000 men. As the premier fencing master of the 32nd Regiment, Jean-Louis was the first up. His opponent was Giacomo Ferrari, a celebrated Florentine swordsman and fencing master of the 1st Regiment. Drums rolled. The troops were ordered to parade rest, and as they slammed down the butts of their muskets in unison, the earth shook. Jean-Louis and Giacomo Ferrari stepped onto the fencing strip, each stripped to the waist to show that they wore nothing that would turn a thrust. An expectant silence filled the air as every eye was fixed on the two masters. The fencing masters crossed swords and the bout began. Ferrari took the offensive, but Jean-Louis followed all his flourishes with a calm but intense attention. Every time Ferrari tried to strike, his sword met steel. With a loud cry, Ferrari jumped to the side and attempted an attack from below, but Jean-Louis parried the thrust, and with a lightning riposte wounded Ferrari in the shoulder. Quote, "It is nothing. Start the fight again," end quote, cried Ferrari, getting back to his feet. Jean-Louis' next thrust struck home, and Ferrari fell dead. Jean-Louis wiped the blood from his blade, resumed his first position, and waited. His battle had only begun. The victor in each bout was to continue until he was injured or killed, and Jean-Louis still faced 14 swordsmen of the 1st Regiment, all of them eager to avenge their comrade. Another adversary came at him. After a brief clash, Jean-Louis lunged and, while recovering, left his point in line. Rushing at him, his opponent was impaled. A second corpse lay at the French master's feet. His third opponent, a taller man, attacked fiercely, with jumps and feints, but Jean-Louis' point disappeared into his chest, and he fell unconscious. The next man approached. The regiments watched in fascinated silence. They were accustomed to the wholesale music of slaughter, the booming of artillery, the bursting of shells, the rattle of musketry, the clash of sabers. All are impressive, but none so keenly painful as the thin whisk of steel against steel, as men engage in single combat. As one contemporary observer wrote, quote, "It goes clean through the mind and makes the blood of the brain run cold." End quote. End overall quote. Here we see another image inset into the article. Black and white, with a black man in a white fencing suit, what appears to be, and a white man standing to the side who's holding a sword. And they both seem to be engaging in a friendly exchange of words, not of steel. The caption for the image reads, "Jean-Louis and his fencing master M. Dera," from El Almanac de Sports, 1899. Continuing the earlier quote, "After 40 minutes, only 2 Italian provosts were left awaiting their turn, pale but resolved. A truce was called, and the colonel of the 32nd approached Jean-Louis. Quote, "Maître," end quote, he said, quote, "you have valiantly defended the regiment's honor. And in the name of your comrades and my name, I thank you sincerely. However, 13 consecutive duels have taken too much of your body stamina. Retire now, and if the provosts decide to finish the combat with their opponents, they will be free to do so." End quote. Quote, "No, no!" End quote, exploded Jean-Louis. Quote, "I shall not leave the post which has been assigned me by the confidence of the 32nd Regiment. Here I shall remain, and here I shall fight as long as I can hold my weapon." End quote. As he finished his statement, he made a flourish with his sword, which cut one of his friends on the leg. Quote, "Ah," unquote, cried Jean Louis, distraught. Quote, "There has only been one man of the 32nd wounded today, and it had to be by me." End quote. Seizing upon the incident, the colonel said, quote, "This is a warning. There has been enough blood. All have fought bravely, and reparation has been made. Do you trust my judgment in the matter of honor?" End quote. After Jean Louis said he did, the colonel said there was nothing more to do but extend a hand to the 1st Regiment. Pointing to the 2 provosts who still waited, he said to Jean Louis, quote, "They cannot come to you." End quote. Jean Louis dropped his sword, approached the 2 Italians, and clasped them by the hands. His regiment cheered, quote, "Vive Jean Louis! Vive the 32nd Regiment!" End quote. Jean Louis added, quote, "Vive the 1st! We are but one family. Vive l'armée!" End quote. End overall quote. The story was from Paul Kirchner, The Deadliest Men, linked here in red. Below that, we see a grayscale. Appears to be a painting with many onlookers in the background and 2 fencers in the foreground. The caption reads, 1816 match between the Comte de Bondy and the fencing master Lafagère by Frederic Regamey. Jean Louis presided as, quote, "President des Combats," end quote, and can be seen at center. Continuing on, Jean Louis's fencing style would become a major influence on the French school of fencing, and he is credited with the saying, now famous among fencers, quote, "A foil should be held as one holds a little bird, not so tightly as to crush it, but just enough to prevent it escaping from the hand." End quote. He became sought out by members of the nobility for fencing instruction. Jean Louis retired from the army in 1849 at age 65 and began teaching fencing permanently at his school in Montpellier. Later, he came to denounce dueling. He instructed his daughter in the art of fencing, and she would go on to become one of his most accomplished disciples. Here is another image inset into the article. Appearing to be a painting of an elderly black man with gray or white hair, we see 2 foils on either side of the portrait extending behind the portrait with the name Jean Louis. The caption for the image reads, "Arsène Vigent, a famous writer on fencing, remarked of him, quote, Jean Louis' face, which appeared hard at first meeting, hid a soul of great goodness and generosity." End quote. Section Basile Croquier. During the 19th century, New Orleans came to be regarded by many as the dueling capital of the Western world. There, duels were fought more frequently than in any other American city. As to exact statistics, one 19th century visitor noted that, quote, "In 1834, there were no less than 365 duels, or one for every day in the year, 15 having been fought on one Sunday morning. In 1835, there were 102 duels fought in that city, betwixt the 1st of January and the end of April." End quote. In 1839, another resident noted, quote, 13 duels have been fought in and near the city during the week. 5 more were to take place this morning." End quote. Most of these duels were said to have been fought by those of French Creole descent. However, in 1833, William Ladd noted that blacks, quote, "are taking it up," in parentheses, dueling, end parentheses, end quote, in the city. Here we have a section of a newspaper article, quote, A black duel at New Orleans. A court of honor was some time since established at New Orleans, with the object of preventing dueling. It seems to have had very little effect. The New Orleans True American contains an account of an, quote, affair of honor, unquote, in which two gentlemen of color were the combatants. They used broadswords and fought furiously, but were separated by some white bystanders before they had time to kill each other scientifically. They had previously fought another duel with pistols. The duel was fought in one of the most public streets of New Orleans at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. End quote. In fact, African Americans fought a large number of duels in Louisiana, which were reported throughout newspapers of the era. One example, published in April 1872 by the New York Times, noted that, quote, two young colored men fought a duel with small swords in New Orleans on Tuesday, and one was slightly wounded in the breast. One is a son of an Internal Review assessor, and the other a son of a custom house official. The quarrel grew out of testimony given before the Congressional Investigating Committee. End quote. Below that appears to be a sepia-toned photograph of 5 men standing there. It's a 6-1 crouching down. And the caption reads, photograph, likely posed, of African American men preparing for a pistol duel, circa 1895. Continuing on. Due in part to this prolific dueling culture, the tradition of classical and historic fencing flourished in old New Orleans. From about 1830 until the Civil War, at least 50 maîtres d'armes, parentheses, masters of arms, end parentheses, operated fencing academies in Exchange Alley from Canal to Conti between Royal and Bourbon Streets. Of these, the author has personally come across 6 New Orleans fencing masters of African ancestry. Among the most notable of these were, quote, Black, end quote, Austin, a free black man, and Robert Severin, also of African ancestry, who fought at least one duel in the city and served as a second in at least another. The most renowned of these masters, however, was Basil Croquer. Croquer, according to Lafcadio Hearn, was, quote, the most remarkable colored swordsman of Louisiana, end quote. For much of the last century, Croquer's life has been shrouded in mystery, and what is known about him consists mostly of scraps of anecdotal information set down in local histories. What is certain is that he was born in New Orleans around 1800 to a white father and a mother of mixed African-European ancestry. At a young age, Croquer took part in the War of 1812 and likely participated in the famous Battle of New Orleans, parentheses, 1815, end parentheses, in which the Americans soundly expelled the British and effectively won the war. In 1879, Croquer was listed as a member of l'Association des Vétérans de 1814-15. Like the famous St. George's, Croquer was sent by his white father to be educated in Paris, where he obtained a degree in mathematics, and probably received some, if not most, of his fencing instruction. After completing his studies in France, Croquer returned to New Orleans, where he set up shop as both a fencing master and a staircase builder, in which profession he applied his mathematical knowledge to construct the, quote, soaring multidimensional staircases, end quote, which became the staple of antebellum Southern mansions. By all accounts, Croquer was one of the best masters of arms in New Orleans. As one author of the period recounted, quote, though the population could count a considerable number of these fencing experts and duelists, Basil Croquer was proclaimed their superior in all things. ... He employed his talent to train the youth, to give them the benefit of his skill and his knowledge in arms. Unquote. in a city known as the fencing and dueling Mecca of North America, where men literally lived and died by the sword on a daily basis. This was high praise. Quote, Mr. Basile was an educated and respectable man. He knew how to estimate and consider by his character, his behavior, and his distinguished manners. It was not therefore strange that a man having these recommendable qualities should enjoy a certain credit among people of high society, in whom he cultivated an elite clientele. ... As to his profession of arms, it is told that he could touch his opponent almost as though composing a ballad. ... He often said that his chest was a holy place. It was filled with air because, we are told, no adversary's foil was ever able to touch it. ... End quote. John Augustine, parentheses, 1838 to 1888, end parentheses, a New Orleans poet, editor, and Confederate veteran, recounted that Croker, quote, was such a fine blade that many of the best Creole gentlemen did not hesitate, notwithstanding the strong prejudice against color, to frequent his salle d'armes, and even cross swords with him in private assaults. End quote. Although little is known about this extraordinary master, his legend continues to endure among New Orleans guidebooks and books about dueling. Although it would be presumptuous to declare him the greatest of African-American martial artists, he was, by all accounts, an extraordinary person and a swordsman of the highest caliber. Below that we have another image inset here. Grayscale painting. Appears to be 4 to 5 people in the painting. And the caption for it reads, above, a duel under the famous, quote, dueling oaks, end quote, in New Orleans City Park. Here ends the article. There is a further reading section that has names and links in red for further reading. Below that it reads, this article copyright in 2015 by Ben Miller. All rights reserved. Excerpts and links may be used, provided that credit is given with appropriate and specific direction to the original content. This, as well as the links I mentioned from Wichtenauer, will be in the description below. Thank you for watching and listening, and I will see you in the next video.